My son thought his expensive suit and confident smile were enough to trick me out of the home I had owned for 30 years. He believed I was just a frail widow he could manipulate into signing away my deed. But he made one fatal mistake. He forgot that the woman who raised him knows how to spot a lie. By the time he realized I was fighting back, his perfect life was already shattering. My name is Evelyn Hart, and at 58 years of age, I had convinced myself that my life in Briar Landing was exactly what I wanted it to be. The town itself was a quiet place where the river moved slower than the traffic, and everyone knew the colour of your front door. I spent my mornings drinking black coffee on the porch of the house my late husband and I had bought 3 decades ago, and my afternoons working part-time at Riverside Municipal Services. It was not a glamorous job. I filed permits and answered phones in a building that smelled permanently of stale paper and floor wax. But the paycheck kept the lights on and the pantry full. I did not need much. I had my garden, my books, and the comfort of knowing that the roof over my head was fully paid for. For a long time, that sense of security was enough. I lived a small life, but it was mine. However, the silence in my house had started to feel different lately. It used to feel peaceful, but recently it had begun to feel heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. The source of that pressure was almost 100 miles away in the gleaming city of Clearwater Heights, where my only son, Logan Hart, had built a life that looked nothing like the one I raised him in. Logan had always been ambitious, but his success had created a chasm between us that I could no longer bridge with holiday cards and Sunday phone calls. He had become a man of sharp suits and even sharper words. In the past 6 months, his calls had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a polished, hollow politeness that made my stomach turn. He no longer asked about my hydrangeas or the leak in the basement. Instead, he asked about property taxes and zoning laws. "Mother, are you sure you are managing the upkeep he had asked me 2 weeks ago?" His voice sounding tinny through the receiver. "I worry that it is becoming too much for one person." "I am fine, Logan," I had replied, gripping the phone a little too tightly. "I mowed the lawn just yesterday. It is not just the lawn." He had sighed, a sound that conveyed deep, performative exhaustion. "It is the liability. We need to talk about the future. I am coming down this weekend. We need to have a serious conversation about the family assets." Family assets. The phrase hung in the air of my kitchen long after we hung up. I did not have a portfolio or a trust fund. I had this house, a modest savings account, and an old sedan. The way he said it made me feel like a corporation being liquidated rather than a mother being visited by her son. The anxiety bled into my daily routine. When I walked to work the next morning, the friendly wave from the postman felt ominous. When I sat at my desk at Riverside Municipal Services, I found myself staring blankly at building permits, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. I tried to tell myself I was just a paranoid old woman. Logan was my son. He had my eyes. He used to cry when he scraped his knees. He would not hurt me. But the gut instinct of a mother is rarely wrong. On Thursday afternoon, 2 days before Logan was scheduled to arrive, I walked down the gravel driveway to check the mail. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain. I pulled out a stack of bills and circulars, flipping through them absently as I walked back toward the porch. Most of it was junk, but one envelope stood out. It was plain white, with no return address. Just my name printed in a stark, official font. I tore it open right there on the front steps. Inside was a glossy brochure featuring a smiling, silver-haired couple sitting on a beach. The bold text across the top read, "Assisted Asset Transfer Services for Seniors. Simplify your downsizing today." My breath hitched in my throat. I had never requested information on downsizing. I had never looked up asset transfers. I stood there, the wind whipping the paper against my thumb, and felt a cold realization settle deep in my bones. This was not junk mail. This was a prelude. My son was not coming to visit me. He was coming to close a deal. The gravel crunched loudly under the tires of a sleek black sedan as it pulled into my driveway. It was a car that screamed money, looking entirely out of place against the backdrop of my peeling porch railings and the overgrown lilac bushes. I watched from the living room window as Logan stepped out. He was wearing a tailored suit that likely cost more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. He buttoned his jacket, smoothed his tie, and looked up at the house. He did not smile. He narrowed his eyes, scanning the roofline and the siding with a cold, calculating gaze that felt more like an appraisal than a homecoming. I opened the front door before he could knock. "Hello?" "Logan," I said. "Hi." "Mom?" he replied, stepping inside and offering me a stiff, one-armed hug. He smelled of expensive cologne and the city. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask about the neighbors. Instead, he walked past me into the living room, his eyes immediately darting to the water stain on the ceiling I had been meaning to fix. "Place is looking tired," he commented, running a finger along the dust on the mantelpiece. "You still haven't fixed that draft in the hallway." "It is an old house." "Logan," I said, closing the door behind him to shut out the wind. "It has history." He chuckled, a dry sound, devoid of humor. "History doesn't pay for heat." "Listen, Mum, things are going really well for me. I just landed a senior position at a firm called North Shore Equities. We handle high-level real estate investments. I am managing portfolios worth millions now." "That is wonderful," I said, though my voice sounded small in the quiet room. I stayed near the entrance to the kitchen, watching him pace around the room. He looked like a shark circling a very small boat. "It is," he said, turning to face me with a practiced, winning smile. "And being in this industry has opened my eyes. It is dangerous for a woman your age to be living in a place this size. 4 bedrooms for one person. It is inefficient, Mom, and frankly, it is a liability. I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself," I replied, keeping my hands clasped tight in front of me to hide the slight tremor in my fingers. "For now," he said, his voice dropping to a tone that was thick with exaggerated concern. "But what about 5 years from now? What if you fall down those stairs at North Shore? We help seniors make smart transfers. We help them liquidate stagnant assets like this old place so they can move into assisted living communities. You could have a much easier life. No repairs, no taxes, just comfort." I remained silent, studying his face. I was looking for my son, the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knees, but I could only see a businessman trying to close a deal. He was not worried about my safety. He was frustrated that an asset was going to waste. Logan mistook my silence for hesitation. He walked over and placed his hands on my shoulders, looking down at me with eyes that were pleading but hard as flint underneath. "I only want what is best for you," he said softly. "You shouldn't be burdened by this place. Let me help you liberate the equity here. I have connections. We can move fast." He let go of me and reached into his leather briefcase, pulling out a thick document clipped together. He placed it on the coffee table with a heavy thud that echoed in the silence. "I have already had the legal team draft the preliminary paperwork," he said, pulling a gold pen from his pocket. "It just authorizes me to handle the boring stuff. The agents, the bank, the title company. You won't have to lift a finger." He held the pen out to me. "Conco the lo moi thu tuk," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "Just sign this power of attorney." I took the pen from his hand, feeling the cold weight of the metal against my skin. Logan watched me with a predator's intensity, his breath held in anticipation. He expected me to sign on the dotted line immediately, just like the confused, helpless old woman he assumed I had become. But instead of signing, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses. I saw his jaw tighten. It was a microscopic movement, a slight clench of the muscle. But I saw it. "Mom, you don't need to read the fine print," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded like dry leaves cracking. "It is just standard boilerplate legal jargon. It means I can pay your electric bill if you forget." I ignored him and brought the paper closer to the light. The header read, "Durable Power of Attorney." But as my eyes scanned down to the second paragraph, the legal terms hit me like a physical blow. It was not a limited agreement. It contained a clause for full disposition authority. It explicitly granted him the right to sell, transfer, or liquidate any real estate property in my name without my prior consent or signature. The room suddenly felt very cold. I looked up at him, and for a split second, the image of the man in the expensive suit flickered. In my mind, I saw the 6-year-old boy who used to run into my arms after school, smelling of grass and sunshine, promising me he would build me a castle one day. That boy had been so gentle that he cried when he accidentally stepped on a snail. Now, that same boy was standing in my living room, trying to steal the roof over my head. The betrayal did not feel like anger at first. It felt like a hollow ache in the center of my chest, a profound sorrow that made it hard to breathe. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him and ask what had happened to his soul. But I knew that if I showed emotion, if I raised my voice, he would use it against me. He would tell everyone I was hysterical, unstable, or slipping into dementia. I slowly took off my glasses and folded them on the table. "This gives you the right to sell my house." "Logan," I said, my voice sounding far steadier than I felt. "It is not just for managing bills. Why would you need the power to sell my home immediately?" Logan shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He adjusted his silk tie, his eyes fixing on a spot on the wall just above my head. He could not look at me. "You don't understand the market, Mum," he said, his voice taking on that condescending, lecturing tone. "Real estate is volatile right now. We are looking at a major correction. If we don't position your assets correctly within the next 30 days, you could lose almost 40% of the equity. I am trying to protect you. I am trying to save your legacy." Lies. They spilled out of him so easily. I knew enough about the local market to know prices in Briar Landing were rising, not falling. Then it clicked. The envelope in the mail. The brochure about assisted asset transfer. That had not been a random solicitation. Logan must have put me on a list. Or perhaps he had sent it himself to prime me for this conversation. He had been planning this for months, orchestrating my displacement while I was knitting blankets and waiting for his phone calls. "I am not signing this today," I said, pushing the paper back toward him. "Mom, please." He snapped, his mask slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal pure desperation. "You are being difficult. I have to drive back to the city tonight. Just sign it so I don't have to come back down here next week." "Then you will have to come back," I said, standing up. I need to read it over with a clear head. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Logan stared at me, his face reddening, but he realized he had pushed too hard. He snatched the papers off the table and shoved them back into his briefcase. "Fine," he spat out. "Read it. But don't blame me when things go south and I can't help you." He stormed out without a goodbye. I listened to the roar of his engine as he peeled out of the driveway, driving far too fast for our quiet street. The house fell into a heavy silence. I sat on the sofa for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across the floorboards. I felt small and incredibly old. My own son viewed me as an obstacle to be removed, a resource to be harvested. Eventually, I stood up to clear the coffee cup he had left on the side table. As I lifted the coaster, I noticed a small white rectangle he must have pulled out of his pocket when he was reaching for his pen. It was a business card. I picked it up. It was thick, premium cardstock. Harold McKinney, senior attorney at law, North Shore Equities Legal Department. My blood ran cold. He had brought his company lawyer's paperwork with him. This was not a son helping a mother. This was a corporate acquisition. I gripped the card until its edges bit into my palm. I walked over to the front door and engaged the deadbolt, turning it with a loud, final click. I was not going to sign that paper. I was not going to let him win. I did not know exactly what kind of trouble my son was in, but I knew one thing for certain: I was going to find out the truth before I signed away a single day of my life. I called in sick to Riverside Municipal Services for the first time in 12 years. Instead of filing permits, I took the 7:30 bus to Clearwater Heights. The city was a maze of steel and glass that made me feel insignificant, but I clutched my handbag tightly against my chest and found the address printed on the business card. The offices of North Shore Equities were located on the 14th floor of a building that looked like a giant ice cube. The reception area was sterile and silent, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive espresso. I gave my name to a young woman who looked at me with barely concealed boredom and told me to wait. I sat in a low leather chair, trying to make myself as small as possible. A frosted glass partition separated the waiting area from the hallway, but voices carried over the top. Two men were standing just on the other side of the glass. "The Anderson transfer is finalized," one voice said, sounding brisk and satisfied. "The son is anxious to liquidate. He wants the cash for a startup in Austin." "Did we get the competency waiver?" a second voice asked. "Yeah." The mother barely knew what day it was. "We fast-tracked it as a compassionate takeover. Easy commission." My stomach churned. They were talking about people's lives like they were trading baseball cards. Before I could process the cruelty of it, the receptionist called my name. "Mr. McKinney will see you now." Harold McKinney was a man who seemed to be made entirely of sharp angles. He sat behind a desk that was too large for the room, surrounded by framed degrees that I suspected were more for show than substance. He did not stand up when I entered. He just gestured to the chair opposite him. "Mrs. Hart," he said, his smile failing to reach his eyes. "Logan told me he dropped off the paperwork. I assume you are here to notarize the durable power of attorney. We can get this done in 10 minutes? I sat down, keeping my hands folded in my lap to hide the fact that they were shaking. I had some questions. "Mr. McKinney," I said, Logan seemed very urgent about this. I wanted to understand why my son feels the need to take full control of my assets right now. Harold sighed and took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if I were an unruly child. Look, Mrs. Hart, Logan is just trying to protect you, he said, his voice dropping to a patronizing register. Given your declining situation, it is standard procedure. I stiffened. My situation? The memory lapses, Harold said casually, glancing at a file on his desk. The confusion. Logan was very transparent with us about your cognitive decline. He mentioned you have been forgetting to pay bills, leaving the stove on, getting lost in your own neighborhood. He is terrified you are going to hurt yourself or lose the house to the state. The air left my lungs. Logan had not just lied about the market. He had lied about me. He was painting a picture of a senile, incompetent old woman who needed a guardian. If I signed that paper, I would be validating his lie. I would be admitting that I was no longer capable of being an adult. I see. I managed to say. The room spun slightly, but I forced myself to focus on the silver pen on his desk. We have an expedited legal support program. Harold continued, sliding a document toward me. It bypasses the usual court hearings for competency. If you sign this voluntary admission of incapacity along with the power of attorney, Logan can secure the assets by Friday. It saves everyone the embarrassment of a public hearing. He was offering me a trap wrapped in convenience. He wanted me to sign away my sanity so his firm could get their commission and my son could get his money. I knew I had to get out of there. If I argued, he would call Logan. If I got angry, he would say it was a symptom of my dementia. I forced a confused smile onto my face. I reached up and touched my forehead, feigning a moment of dizziness. Oh dear, I whispered. I think I left the stove on. Or did I can't remember if I turned it off before I left. Harold looked at me with a mixture of pity and validation. He thought he was seeing the proof of Logan's claims. This is exactly why you need to sign. Mrs. Hart, he said. I know, I said, standing up unsteadily. But I need to go home and check. I can't focus when I am worried about the house burning down. I will take the papers home. I will sign them there. I promise. Harold hesitated, but he clearly did not want to deal with a confused senior citizen having a panic attack in his office. Fine, he said, waving a hand dismissively. Take the papers, but tell Logan to bring them back by tomorrow morning. We are on a tight schedule. I walked out of the building with the dossier tucked under my arm. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The cold wind of the city hit my face, drying the sweat on my brow. I realized then that this was not just a financial scheme. My son was building a cage for me, bar by bar, using lies to convince the world I belonged inside it. He was ready to erase my identity to get to my deed, but he had made a miscalculation. He thought I was the confused woman he described to his lawyer. He was about to find out that Evelyn Hart was fully awake. When I returned to the silence of my empty house, I did not cry. The time for tears had passed in that sterile waiting room. Now was the time for accounting. I walked into my bedroom and knelt inside the walk-in closet, pushing aside the heavy winter coats that smelled of mothballs and cedar. At the very back, hidden beneath a stack of old quilts, sat a heavy, fireproof lockbox. Logan knew about this box. He thought it contained birth certificates, my marriage license, and perhaps a few savings bonds worth $50 each. He had never bothered to ask for the combination because he assumed there was nothing inside worth taking. He was wrong. I spun the dial right to 18, left to 42, right to 9. The latch clicked open with a satisfying snap. Inside lay the paperwork that defined the true scope of my life, a life I had kept hidden even from him. When my husband passed away 20 years ago, he left me a modest life insurance payout. Logan thought I had spent it on repairs and living expenses. Instead, I had lived on my meager salary and invested every single penny of the insurance money. I had bought into tech stocks in the late 90s when everyone else was afraid. I had purchased municipal bonds. I had let compound interest work its quiet, powerful magic for 2 decades. I pulled out the most recent quarterly statement. My net worth was not measured in the thousands. It was well over $1.5 million. The house Logan was so desperate to steal was worth perhaps $300,000 on a good day. It was a fraction of what I actually owned. My son looked at me and saw a liability. He saw a crumbling asset that needed to be liquidated. He had no idea that the grey-haired woman he was trying to commit to a facility could buy and sell his entire lifestyle without breaking a sweat. I took the statement and the treacherous legal documents Logan had given me, and I drove straight to Marjorie's house. Marjorie was a retired forensic accountant who had spent 40 years catching people who tried to hide money from the IRS. She was 70 years old, sharp as a tack, and trusted nobody except her cat and me. We sat at her kitchen table with strong black tea. Marjorie read the documents Harold McKinney had given me. She read them once. Then she read them again, her frown deepening with every page. Finally, she took off her glasses and looked at me with genuine fear in her eyes. "Evie, this is not a standard power of attorney," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "This is a bleed-out clause. Look at Section 4. It gives him the right to liquidate your real estate to cover anticipated medical costs without any medical proof required. If you sign this, he can sell your house next week, dump the money into an account he controls, and charge you management fees until the account is empty. You would be homeless and broke in 30 days. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, but I nodded slowly. It was exactly what I had suspected. "You need a lawyer, Evelyn," Marjorie said, reaching for her phone. "I know a shark in the city. We can get a restraining order. We can charge him with attempted fraud." "No," I said, placing my hand over hers to stop her. "No," Marjorie stared at me. "He is trying to destroy you. Evie. You can't just let this slide. If I get a lawyer now, Logan will just retreat," I said, my voice hardening. "He will claim it was a misunderstanding. He will say he just wanted to help his confused mother. He will walk away and try this again with someone else, or wait until I actually am too old to fight back. I don't want to just stop him, Marjorie. I want to teach him. Teach him what Marjorie asked, that he is not the smartest person in the room," I replied. "He thinks I am weak. He thinks I am senile. I am going to use that against him. I am going to let him think he has won, right up until the moment he loses everything." Marjorie looked at me for a long moment. Then a slow, wicked grin spread across her face. "Okay," she said. "If you want to play that game, we need to make sure your assets are untouchable before you invite the wolf back in. We have a lot of work to do tonight." I looked down at the papers that were meant to be my death sentence. My son wanted a war over money. He was about to find out that he had brought a knife to a gunfight. The next morning, I did not go to work. Instead, I took a taxi to the financial district to meet with Clara Jennings. Clara was not like Harold McKinney. She did not work for a massive firm that churned out lawsuits like fast food. She ran a boutique practice specializing in complex family estate disputes, and she had a reputation for being as ruthless as she was elegant. Marjorie had called in a favor to get me the appointment, and when I sat across from Clara, I understood why she was so feared. She listened to my story without interrupting, her eyes scanning the documents Logan had given me with laser focus. "This is not just a power of attorney." "Evelyn," Clara said, placing the papers down on her mahogany desk. "This is a hostile takeover disguised as elder care. Based on the wording here, I suspect your son has already filed a preliminary motion with the probate court to request a competency hearing. He is setting the stage to argue that you are mentally unfit. He thinks I am senile," I said, my voice steady, despite the anger boiling in my veins. "He told his lawyer I leave the stove on and get lost in my own neighborhood. Then we need to prove him wrong before he even steps into a courtroom," Clara replied, opening her laptop. "We are going to have you evaluated by an independent geriatric psychiatrist today. We will get affidavits from your employer, your neighbors, and your bank. We will build a wall of evidence so high he won't be able to climb over it. We spent the next 3 hours fortifying my legal standing. But the most important move was financial. With Clara's help, I executed a series of electronic transfers that moved the bulk of my investment portfolio over $1.5 million into a blind trust. The trust was legally detached from my personal identity and shielded from any guardianship claims. If Logan managed to get power of attorney over me tomorrow, all he would find were my meager checking account and the deed to the house. The real wealth was now invisible to him. "There is something else," Clara said, her tone shifting. She slid a thin folder across the desk toward me. "When you told me about Logan's urgency, I had my investigator run a background check on him, not just criminal, but financial." I opened the folder. The numbers swimming before my eyes were staggering, but they were all in red. "He is successful, isn't he?" I asked, confused. "He wears Italian suits. He drives a car that costs more than my annual salary. He is drowning." "Evelyn," Clara said softly, "Logan isn't just an employee at North Shore Equities. He tried to play the market with his own money, and he lost badly. He leveraged his reputation to borrow nearly $400,000 from private lenders to cover a speculative real estate deal that went bust 3 months ago. The loans are coming due next week." I stared at the paper, my heart hammering against my ribs. The dates lined up perfectly. The sudden phone calls, the visit, the rush to get me to sign the papers. He did not care about my safety. He did not even care about the house itself. He needed collateral. He needed an asset he could liquidate immediately to pay off his debts before his firm found out and fired him, or before his creditors did something worse. "He is broke," I whispered, the realization settling over me like a heavy shroud. "Worse," Clara corrected me. "He is desperate. A greedy man might wait for a better deal. A desperate man will burn everything down to save himself. If he doesn't get your house, he faces total ruin." I closed the folder. I felt a strange mixture of pity and revulsion. My son was not the master of the universe he pretended to be. He was a frightened child who had made a mess and was trying to steal his mother's livelihood to clean it up. "He thinks he is cornered," I said, looking up at Clara. "He thinks the only way out is through me. He is dangerous right now," Clara warned. "You need to be careful." "I don't need to be careful," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. I need to be ready. He is coming back this weekend to collect his prize. I think it is time I welcomed him home. I called Logan and told him I was ready to talk about the paperwork. I did not say I would sign it, but he heard what he wanted to hear. He arrived at the house in record time, his car screeching into the driveway less than 2 hours after we hung up. He stormed into the kitchen with the energy of a man who sees the finish line of a marathon, his face flushed with a mixture of relief and adrenaline. "Thank God. Mom," he said, not bothering to take off his coat. He slapped a fresh copy of the power of attorney onto the kitchen table. "I knew you would come to your senses. I have a notary on standby in town. We can get this signed, faxed, and filed before the close of business." "Where is your pen?" I sat at the table, my hands resting on top of the manila folder Clara had given me. I did not move to pick up the pen. I just looked at him, really looked at him, trying to find the child I had rocked to sleep decades ago. "Sit down. Logan," I said quietly. "I don't have time to sit." He snapped, checking his expensive watch. "I have a dinner meeting in the city at 8. Just sign the papers. I know about the debt." "Logan," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Logan froze, his hand halfway to his pocket. He blinked, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his eyes before he masked it with a scoff of disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice pitching slightly higher. "I told you. The market is volatile. Everyone carries some leverage. It is how business works." "I am not talking about leverage," I replied, opening the folder and spreading the documents out on the flowered tablecloth. "I am talking about $400,000 in private loans that are due next week. I am talking about the speculative deal in the warehouse district that went bankrupt. I am talking about the fact that you are insolvent." Logan stared at the papers. He saw the credit reports. He saw the loan agreements with his signature on them. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking grey and sickly. For a moment, I thought he might cry. He slumped into the chair opposite me, the arrogance deflating out of him like air from a punctured tire. "Mom, please," he whispered, his voice trembling. You don't understand. It was a sure thing. The zoning was supposed to change. I just needed a little more time. If I don't pay them back, I lose everything. My job, my condo, my reputation. They will destroy me." "So you decided to destroy me instead?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to stay strong. "You were going to sell my home, the only home I have, to cover your gambling losses." His head snapped up, and the sorrow in his eyes instantly hardened into rage. He slammed his hand on the table, making the china cabinet rattle. "It is just a house," he shouted, spit flying from his lips. "God, you are so selfish. You are sitting here on this pile of equity, hoarding it like a miser while your own son is drowning. You don't need 4 bedrooms. You don't need a yard. You are just an old woman living in the past. I am your mother," I said, feeling a cold numbness spreading through my chest. "Then act like one," he yelled, standing up and pacing the small kitchen. "Mothers sacrifice for their children. You are supposed to help me, but no. You just want to stay in this rotting box and play gardener while I lose my entire future. You have no idea how the real world works. You think you are protecting yourself, but you are just being petty." I watched him pace, listening to him twist the narrative until he was the victim and I was the villain. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He truly believed he was entitled to my life's work simply because he had failed at his own. I am not signing. Logan, I said. He stopped pacing. He turned to me, and his face was something I did not recognize. It was cold, hard, and terrifyingly empty of love. He leaned down, placing his hands on the table and bringing his face inches from mine. You think this is over because you found some papers? He hissed, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. I have power of attorney over your medical decisions too. Remember, I can make things very difficult for you. I can have you declared incompetent. I can have you put away where no one will listen to you. Get out, I said. He straightened up, buttoning his jacket with shaking hands. He looked at me with pure hatred. If you don't sign that paper by tomorrow morning, he said, pointing a finger at my face, you will regret it for the rest of your miserable life. He turned and walked out, slamming the front door so hard that a picture frame fell off the wall in the hallway. I did not flinch. I just sat there in the silence, listening to the sound of my son driving away, knowing that the war had truly begun. As the echo of the slamming door faded, I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen before I pressed the stop button on the voice recorder app. The red light blinked off. I had captured every word, every insult, and every threat my son had just hurled at me. He thought he was intimidating a helpless widow. He did not realize he was providing evidence for a criminal investigation. The next morning at 9 o'clock, I met Clara at the county clerk's office. We did not file the papers Logan wanted. Instead, we filed a petition for an elder financial abuse protection order. Immediately after that, I signed the deed transfer documents we had prepared. I legally transferred the ownership of my home from Evelyn Hart to a newly formed entity called the Hart Legacy Trust. I appointed myself as the sole trustee. The house was no longer mine to give away, and it was certainly not Logan's to take. It was locked inside a legal fortress that required my explicit, uncoerced permission to unlock. It took 48 hours for Logan to find out. I was in the garden pruning my roses when a silver luxury sedan pulled up to the curb, followed closely by Logan's black car. He had brought reinforcements. Harold McKinney stepped out of the silver car, clutching a briefcase and looking like a man who had been interrupted during a very expensive lunch. Logan looked manic. His tie was crooked, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "What did you do?" Logan screamed as he marched up the walkway. "The title company just called me. They said there is a block on the deed. They said the property has been transferred." "Hello, Logan," I said, stripping off my gardening gloves. "Good afternoon, Mr. McKinney. Please, come inside. We have things to discuss." I led them into the living room. I did not offer them tea. I sat in my armchair, while they remained standing, looming over me like storm clouds. "Mrs. Hart." "This is highly irregular," Harold began, his voice smooth but edged with irritation. "Logan informed me that you agreed to the transfer. Now I find out the property has been moved into a trust. You are complicating a very simple process. We need to reverse this immediately so Logan can manage your care." "Manage my care," I repeated, looking him dead in the eye. "Is that what you call it, or do you mean liquidate my assets to cover his bad debts?" Harold stiffened. He glanced at Logan, who was vibrating with rage. "That is privileged information," Harold said curtly, "and irrelevant. The issue here is your capacity. Logan has expressed deep concern that you are making erratic financial decisions. Creating this trust without his oversight proves his point. If you do not reverse this, we will proceed with the competency hearing. We will have the court annul the trust. Is that your legal advice, Mr. McKinney? I asked. Are you advising your client to force a woman he claims is senile to sign legal documents? Because I read the clause you wrote. It allows for the sale of my home without medical review. That sounds like predatory lending, not estate planning. I am a respected attorney, Harold snapped, his face flushing pink. I drafted those documents in good faith based on your son's description of your condition. Do not accuse me of impropriety. Then you should hear the description for yourself. I said. I picked up my phone from the side table and tapped the screen. The room filled with the sound of Logan's voice, clear and loud. If you don't sign that paper by tomorrow morning, you will regret it for the rest of your miserable life. I can have you put away where no one will listen to you. The silence that followed the recording was deafening. Logan looked like he had been shot. Harold McKinney turned a shade of pale that I had never seen on a living human being. He looked from the phone to Logan, and then back to me. He realized in that second that he was not standing in the home of a confused old woman. He was standing in a crime scene, and he was holding the weapon. That is out of context. Logan stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It is a direct threat of unlawful confinement and extortion, I said, picking up a second document from the table. And this is a notarized affidavit from Dr. Aris Thorne, a court-certified geriatric psychiatrist, stating that I am of sound mind and superior cognitive health. I was evaluated yesterday. I looked at Harold. He was no longer the arrogant lawyer. He was a man watching his career flash before his eyes. Mr. McKinney, I said, my voice ice cold. If you continue to help my son try to seize my property, or if you file a single motion questioning my competency, I will send this recording and these documents to the State Bar Association. You will be disbarred for conspiring to commit elder abuse. Do I make myself clear? Harold swallowed hard. He closed his briefcase with a sharp click. He did not look at Logan. Mrs. Hart, Harold said, his voice tight and breathless. I was not aware of the full extent of the dynamic here. I will be recusing myself from this matter effective immediately. Harold! Wait, Logan shouted, reaching for the lawyer's arm. You can't just leave. We have a deal. Harold ripped his arm away as if Logan were contagious. Do not call me again, Harold hissed at him. He turned and practically ran out the front door. I looked at my son. He stood alone in the center of the room, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with the realization that his safety net had just been cut. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to scream, perhaps to beg. But I held up my hand. Sit down, Logan, I commanded. I am not finished with you yet. Logan stared at the floor, his breathing ragged and shallow. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. He looked like a man who had just survived a car crash, only to realize he was still trapped in the wreckage. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up the final document, the one that would seal his fate. You wanted to talk about assets. Logan, I said, placing the thick binder on the table in front of him. So let's talk about them. This is the charter for the Hart Legacy Trust. He looked at the binder with dull, defeated eyes. He did not reach for it. What is the point, he muttered, his voice cracking. You locked the house up. I can't sell it. It's over. Read Clause 7, I commanded. He hesitated, then flipped the pages with a trembling hand. As he read, his brow furrowed in confusion. Beneficiary status, he read aloud, squinting at the fine print. I am the beneficiary, conditional beneficiary. I corrected him. You do not own the house. You do not own the accounts. But the trust is designed to support you, provided you meet specific criteria. To access a single dime, you must enroll in a court-approved financial responsibility program. You must attend weekly therapy sessions for gambling addiction and narcissistic personality traits. And you must maintain 18 months of clean credit history. Logan looked up at me, his face twisting into a sneer of disbelief. You want me to go to rehab? He spat out the word like it was poison. For money, I need cash now. Mum, I don't need 18 months of therapy. The loan sharks aren't going to wait for me to find my inner child. Then you get nothing, I said simply. If you violate any term, or if you attempt to contest the trust, you are permanently disinherited. You will be cut off completely. Cut off from what he shouted, standing up and kicking the chair back. From this rundown house, it is worth $300,000 tops. My debt is $400,000. Even if I got the whole thing, I am still in the hole. You are holding a thimble of water over a man dying of thirst and making him dance for it. I looked at him with a pity that cut deeper than anger. He really did not know. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he had never bothered to look past the surface. Clara, I called out softly. The kitchen door opened, and Clara Jennings stepped into the living room. She had been there the entire time, witnessing every word, every threat, and every confession. Logan recoiled as if he had seen a ghost. You, he stammered, you are the lawyer from the city. Clara did not smile. She walked over to the table and placed a single sheet of paper on top of the trust binder. It was the summary of my investment portfolio. Your mother is not offering you a thimble, Mr. Hart, Clara said, her voice sharp and professional. She is offering you a lifeline you do not deserve. Logan looked down at the paper. His eyes scanned the numbers. He blinked. He leaned closer, and I saw his breath hitch in his throat. 1.5 million, he whispered. The number hung in the air. He looked up at me, his mouth agape, his face draining of all color. You have over $1 million in stocks. Since when? Since before you started high school, I replied. Keeping my voice even, I saved everything your father left. I invested. I lived simply so that one day I could leave you something substantial. I was building an empire for you, Logan. And you tried to burn it down for a quick payout on a house that represents less than 20% of my net worth. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He collapsed back into the chair, his hands gripping his hair. He began to laugh, a manic, broken sound that bordered on sobbing. He had tried to steal a cottage and, in doing so, had locked himself out of a castle. He had destroyed his relationship with me and risked his freedom for a fraction of what would have been his if he had just been a decent son. I didn't know. He choked out, looking up at me with wet, red-rimmed eyes. Mom. I didn't know. I can change. I can fix this. Just sign the funds over to me. I will pay the debt, and then I will do the therapy. I promise. No, I said. Mr. Hart. Clara stepped forward, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. Let me be crystal clear. The trust is final. Evelyn is the trustee. If you attempt to coerce her, threaten her, or harass her again, I will file immediate charges for elder abuse and attempted extortion. With the recording we just made and the testimony of Mr. McKinney, who I assure you is currently trying to save his own license by throwing you under the bus, you will go to prison. Do you understand? Logan looked from Clara to me. He saw the wall of evidence we had built. He saw the fortune he had lost. He saw the mother he had underestimated. I understand, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Good, I said. Now get out of my house. And don't come back until you have your first therapy chip to show me. The silence in my house is no longer heavy. It is the peaceful, settled silence of a fortress that has successfully withstood a siege. In the weeks following the confrontation, I did not sit around waiting for the dust to settle. I hired a contractor to fix the water stain on the ceiling that Logan had sneered at. I repainted the kitchen a bright, cheerful yellow, a colour that makes me smile every time I brew my morning coffee. I realised that for years, I had been maintaining this house as a shrine to the past or a savings account for my son's future. Now, for the first time, I was making it a home for myself. Logan left Briar Landing less than an hour after Clara Jennings threatened him with legal action. He did not say goodbye. He simply got into his car and drove back to the city, leaving his arrogance and his failed schemes on my living room floor. But he found no refuge in Clearwater Heights. Bad news travels fast, especially in the tight-knit world of high-stakes finance. Harold McKinney, desperate to save his own license, had apparently been very vocal about who was to blame for the attempted fraud. Rumours of Logan's insolvency and his predatory attempt to seize his own mother's assets circulated through his firm. Within a week, I heard through Clara that North Shore Equities had quietly let him go. The scandal was too much of a liability. 3 weeks after he left, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, though it looked shakier than I remembered. I stood on the porch and tore it open. It was an apology, or at least Logan's version of one. Mum, I am sorry things got so heated, he wrote, but you have to understand the pressure I was under. I was only trying to do what I thought was best for the family capital. I hope you can be reasonable about the trust terms soon, even in defeat. He could not admit he was wrong. He was still the victim, still justifying the unjustifiable. There was no mention of the therapy he needed to attend. There was no genuine remorse for the pain he had caused. He was still trying to negotiate with a door that had been permanently locked. I did not write back. I walked into the kitchen and fed the letter into the shredder I had purchased for my home office. The whirring sound of the blades slicing through his excuses was the only closure I needed. The Hart Legacy Trust is performing beautifully. With Clara's guidance, the principal amount has grown by another 4% this quarter. My assets are shielded. My medical directives are ironclad. And my future is secure. But more importantly, my present is vibrant. I have started taking a watercolour class at the community centre on Tuesdays. I spend my mornings in the garden, getting my hands dirty in the soil, nurturing life instead of worrying about who might try to cut it down. I have made friends with Marjorie and a few other women from the class, and we drink tea on my porch, laughing loudly enough to scare the birds. I do not hate my son. Hate takes too much energy, and I have none left to waste on him. I pity him. He had everything: a good education, a loving start in life, and a mother who would have done anything for him if he had just been honest. But his greed made him blind. He looked at me and saw a weak old woman. He saw a check to be cashed. I stood on my porch this evening, Watching the sun dip below the horizon and cast long shadows across the lawn I have tended for 30 years. I thought about Logan, sitting somewhere in a rented room in the city, finally forced to face the man he has become. He made a fatal error in judgment. He thought love was a weakness he could exploit. I took a sip of my tea and whispered into the cool evening air. When you tried to take my home, you forgot that I am the one who built it. And I know how to protect what is mine better than anyone thinks. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you folks are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment down below and share your thoughts on whether you think I was too hard on Logan or if he got exactly what he deserved. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash that hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need to hear it.